Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1-800-111-483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. So today we're going to talk about the second half of the IVF journey. You've been through the stimulation, you've been through the egg collection. The embryologist has rung you to say we've got embryos. They're then cultured in the laboratory, usually these days up to 5 days. And the day before the embryo transfer, you're going to get a phone call from the scientists saying that you have an embryo that's growing well and that we'll be putting it back the following day, and that your specialist will have organised a particular time with the scientists to put it back. Generally, this fits in with the specialist jobs of the day, and although you can ask for a specific time, it's not always possible. The nurses or the scientists will tell you to come with at least a half full bladder. The rationale for this is that by filling the bladder to some extent, it straightens it out. If it's in its normal position of tilted forwards, it will push it back a little bit to make the transfer a little bit easier. Also, if your doctor uses ultrasound to help place the embryo in the uterus to ensure that it's in the right place, the bladder assists in the imaging process. If there's any delay in the embryo transfer, that partially empty bladder may become a full bladder, and it's important that you not be uncomfortable when you have the transfer done. So you're allowed to actually empty your bladder if you really need to. It's certainly not vital for a good transfer to have a full bladder. You'll then be led into the transfer room, which usually has a gynecological couch to allow the specialist to get the best possible view of the cervix. When you enter the room, almost certainly you're going to go through an identification process to ensure that the embryo that has been taken from the laboratory is actually your embryo. Cross-reference of your name, your date of birth will be repeated on at least 2 occasions, both between you and the scientist and also with the specialist involved. It almost seems like overkill, the number of times you get asked about your name and confirming your date of birth. But the one error that can occur in an IVF service is to put the wrong embryo back into the wrong person. That obviously would be a huge disaster. And to avoid that happening, and to my knowledge it's never happened in Australia, this identification process is carried out. Now we know who you are, we pop you up on the couch, you'll have taken off your underwear and bear it all to the scientist, and he or she, the specialist, will start by inserting the instrument to allow us to get good access to the cervix. It's called a speculum. Most women will have experienced the use of a speculum in having a pap smear done. For an embryo transfer, in fact, the visualization of the cervix is even more important perhaps than for a pap smear. And so it may take a little time to position the speculum such that the cervix is clearly visible to allow the tubes that are then going to be inserted to carry your embryo into the uterus in exactly the right way. Once the doctor has visualized the cervix, he will generally clean it with a cotton bud, get rid of all the cervical mucus and the progesterone pessaries that you've potentially been using, so that there's no muck around to be taken up inside the cervix by the tube that is now going to be placed there. So the next step is the placement of a firm tube through the neck of the womb up the canal that leads to the uterus. It doesn't go into the uterus. Its job is to guide the next catheter, which carries your embryo, through the cervix and into the uterus. That catheter is very soft and floppy, and that's why we need the firm one to act as a guider for the catheter that will carry the embryo into your uterus. Once that's in the correct place, that first catheter is in the right place, the doctor will inform the scientist, who will then again recheck your name on the dish that's carrying your embryo to make sure that it's absolutely yours. Very gently, they will suck the embryo from its culture medium in the dish up into the catheter. In most clinics, a TV monitor is situated above your bed to allow you to actually see this particular part of the process. Many people will be quick with their iPhones and actually get a picture of the potential new baby. We try not to delay the process because the less time the embryo is outside the body or outside the incubator, the better. Having drawn up the embryo into the catheter, the embryologist will bring that to the specialist. It will be threaded down the firm guiding tube that I mentioned before, and the embryo placed inside the uterus. To transfer the embryo into the uterus, the scientist will use a syringe, and about 0.5 of a ml of culture medium containing the egg will be pushed into the uterus. If ultrasound is being used to watch the process to ensure it's in the right place, that fluid being pushed into the uterus is easily visible. There is debate as to whether ultrasound actually improves pregnancy rates. It certainly ensures that the embryo is in the uterus, but experienced hands probably know what's going on anyway. It certainly can help in difficult cases with fibroids or a long cervix. The scientist then takes the tube back to her microscope and flushes the tube out to make sure the embryo hasn't caught in the tube and that it's actually inside your body, inside your uterus. In about 1 in 50 cases, this situation occurs. The naughty embryo has not left the tube. The scientist will then reload that embryo, bring it back, and we'll put the embryo back, and hopefully this time it will stay. I think in all of my thousands of embryo transfers, only twice has it happened that the embryo hasn't been placed correctly and stayed in the tube for a third time. It is very uncommon. Of those, 1 got pregnant and 1 didn't, but I don't think at all it's related to it sticking in the tube. Once the scientist has given the all clear that the embryo is not in the dish, it is in your uterus, the specialist will take the speculum out, which is actually the nicest part of the whole day, and you're able to get up and get dressed. It seems logical to rest after having an embryo transfer because it might fall out. Well, it absolutely won't fall out. It's not possible that it would fall out. The uterus isn't a balloon. That's what you might imagine it to be, and certainly late in pregnancy when it's swollen with a baby, it is a balloon. But in a non-pregnant state, the front wall and the back wall of the uterus are actually right up against each other. People have made the analogy of sliding the embryo between the sheets of a bed. Another analogy I heard the other day was to imagine that the front wall and the back wall are two pieces of bread with jam stuck in between them, and you're pushing the embryo up into the space of the sandwich. So getting up immediately does not alter pregnancy rates. In the past, people used to put patients to bed for up to 2 days. A clinic I worked in Italy, a specialist there thought that was good for the pregnancy, not to move it at all. It was only when I discovered he owned the hospital that I realised why he was doing it. It was for financial reasons, not necessarily for success in outcomes. And certainly there have been numbers of studies that show that bed rest makes no difference whatsoever. In terms of the things you can do after embryo transfer, I generally say take it easy for the first day, although there's no evidence that it makes any difference. Resuming activities like having sex, again, within 2 days, it seems to make no difference whatsoever to the outcomes. I generally suggest avoiding violent exercise. I tell people that they probably shouldn't go horse riding or moving large wardrobes. Some women love me when I suggest that perhaps housework should be the domain of the partner rather than her for the next week or so. I don't think it makes any difference, but it makes him feel he's doing something useful during this horrible time of waiting, because that's the next step. It is the 10 or 12 days of waiting that many couples report to be the worst part of an IVF cycle. Am I pregnant or am I not? In fresh cycles, you almost certainly will be taking some form of supplementation to ensure the lining of the womb remains stable by improving progesterone levels. This can either be through pessaries themselves in the vagina or by pregnancy hormone injections. In either case, you continue those until you either have a period or you have a negative pregnancy test, or of course a positive test, which would be even better. The weight can't be changed because what we're waiting for is the embryo to attach, to bury in the lining of the womb, to create connections with the maternal blood system so that it can secrete pregnancy hormones into her circulation to tell us that you're pregnant. The odds of a pregnancy depend on your age. The odds of that test being positive depend on the quality of the embryo as well. Eventually, you'll know. A pregnancy test result will be rung through by the nurse, or unfortunately a period may start. Although even if you do get bleeding, it doesn't necessarily mean all is lost. We certainly do get something called implantation bleeding, so always get a blood test done. So, just in summary, the second half of the cycle begins with the formation of embryos in the laboratory, goes through the stages of embryo transfer and the luteal phase support with medications, and the horrible wait for the answer as to whether you're pregnant or not. I hope this helps you understand it a little bit more. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website www.theivfjourney.com and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1-800-111-483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.